Over the last 50 years or so, the way we think about domestic abuse has done a complete 180. It's gone from being this, hidden family secret to something we now recognize as a major public crisis. So in this explainer, we're going to trace that exact journey and really see how far our understanding has come. Okay, to really grasp how much things have changed, you have to see where we started. And honestly, this quote says it all. This is from a judge cited back in 1982. Just let that sink in. The official view was that this was a private issue, not a crime, something to be sorted out behind closed doors, no one else's business. Thankfully, that mindset is pretty much ancient history now. So, what do we mean when we talk about domestic abuse today? Well, it turns out it's a much, much broader idea than a lot of people think. So, let's look at the official definition from the UK Home Office. Now, the word you really need to latch onto there is pattern. That is so crucial because it tells us that we're not just talking about one-off fights or isolated incidents. We're talking about a continuous, often very calculated strategy of behavior. And yeah, it is definitely not just about getting physically hurt. It can be psychological, chipping away at someone's self-worth until they feel like nothing. It can be financial, controlling every penny they have. It can be sexual. It can be deeply emotional. It's like a total assault on who you are as a person. And right at the heart of this pattern of abuse is this really important concept called coercive control. Think of it as the engine that drives the whole thing. This isn't about someone just losing their temper. No. It's a deliberate campaign to make a person subordinate, to make them dependent, by isolating them, regulating their life, and basically stripping away their independence and their very sense of self. So the big question is, how on earth did we get from that judge's draw the curtain mindset to this deep understanding of coercive control? Well, it all started with a kind of sociological revolution back in the 1970s when some researchers decided it was time to pull that curtain back for good. And a huge part of that was thanks to two researchers, Rebecca and Russell Dobash. What they did was honestly groundbreaking at the time. They literally went into police archives and started digging through thousands upon thousands of police records to find out what was really going on behind closed doors. They wanted to see the true scale of the problem. And what they found was just staggering. 25%. A full quarter of all the violent crimes reported to the police in their study were men attacking their female partners. This just blew the lid off the idea that this was some rare private problem. No, this was one of the most common forms of violence happening in society, period. But they didn't just stop at police records. The Dobashes also sat down and interviewed women in shelters. And this is where the brutal reality really came into focus. Just look at these numbers. In what they called a typical violent event, almost half the women, 45%, were punched in the face or body. This makes it crystal clear we are not talking about a simple argument that just got a little out of hand. And this led them to a really clear conclusion. The violence they were seeing wasn't random. It wasn't just happening. It was a tool for maintaining power, for enforcing authority in the home, and it was deeply rooted in these old patriarchal ideas that a man had a right to rule his household. So, as you can imagine, this research lit a fire under a huge debate, one that's actually still going on today. And it's this. Is domestic abuse a fundamentally gendered crime, or is it more of a two-way street, where men and women are just as likely to be violent? This really splits researchers into two main camps. On one side, you have the Violence Against Women, or VAW framework. This one builds on what the Dobashes found and says, look, this is asymmetrical. It's mostly men perpetrating it as a form of control. But on the other side, you have the Family Violence, or FV framework. This one argues it's more symmetrical, that men and women can be equally violent, and it's often caused by things like family stress or bad communication. They're both looking at the same problem, but through completely different lenses. So what do the numbers say? Well, if we look at the data from the UK for just 1 year, it's pretty clear. Now, men are absolutely victims of domestic abuse, nearly 800,000 in this year. But women are victimized at a much higher rate. More than double, actually, at 1.6 million. But here's the thing. The debate isn't just about counting heads. The key difference, supporters of the VAW framework argue, isn't just if violence happens, but why it happens and what the impact is. They point out that men's violence is far more likely to cause serious physical injury and, crucially, to create this constant suffocating climate of fear. Right. So we also have to remember that domestic abuse never happens in a vacuum. It has this ripple effect that spreads outwards, hitting children especially hard. And it gets even more complicated when you layer on other forms of discrimination. So let's kind of unpack that a little bit. Okay, so when it comes to kids, researcher Marianne Hester has this brilliant analogy called the three-planet model. Imagine three separate planets. On planet 1, you've got domestic abuse services, and their focus is on the adult victim. On planet 2, you've got child protection services, focused on the kid's immediate safety. And on planet 3 are the family courts, often focused on the abuser's right to see the child. The huge, massive problem, these three planets almost never talk to each other. They operate in their own orbits, and the kids get lost in the empty space between them. Now, for victims from marginalized communities, the abuse gets layered with other forms of oppression, making everything 10 times harder. There's a name for this concept. It's called intersectionality. And it basically just means that we have to look at how all the different parts of a person's identity, their race, their sexuality, their immigration status, can stack up to create really unique and dangerous barriers.
Let's take a concrete example. For victims in the LGBTQ+ community, an abuser can literally weaponize their identity against them. They can threaten to out them to a hostile family or at work. They can constantly undermine their gender identity. Or they can isolate them from the very LGBTQ+ networks that should be their biggest source of support. And on top of all that, there's the fear of facing prejudice from the police or other services if they do try to get help.
It's a similar story for victims from minority ethnic backgrounds, especially if they're migrants. An abuser can use their immigration status as the ultimate weapon. The threat of "I'll have you deported" becomes this incredibly powerful tool of control, and it creates this profound, paralyzing fear of ever going to the authorities. Okay, so when you take all of these challenges and all this complexity into account, it brings us to what is maybe the biggest, most misunderstood question in all of this: the whole issue of leaving. You've heard it a million times, right? Why don't they just leave? It seems so simple, so logical. If things are that bad, you just walk out the door. But the answer to that question is not simple at all. In fact, it's terrifyingly complex. And here's why. Leaving is by far the most dangerous time for a victim. Just look at this number, 55%. In one study from 2017, over half of the women who were killed by an ex-partner were killed within the first month after they left. The very act of trying to escape is often what triggers the most lethal response. So, because we now understand this danger, the way we respond as a society has had to evolve big time. I mean, we've come a long way from the "don't get involved" attitude of the 70s. Then in the 80s, you saw the first shelters pop up. The 90s brought in pro-arrest policies for police. And today, we're moving towards these big multi-agency models that try to coordinate all the services to manage that incredibly high-risk period. And that really brings us to the final, critical question we have to ask ourselves. If leaving, the one thing everyone says you should do, is actually the most dangerous option, then what does true safety actually look like? It forces us to think way beyond simple answers and get serious about what it really takes to protect people.